In this second session for User Basics, we'll dive back into the data forms, this time looking at the incident data form, as well as a quick look at the 4 general record data forms. In User Basics Part 1, we looked at creating an activity record. At the end of that session, we showed how with a click of a button, we can take the activity information and copy it over to a new incident. This is where we're going to start. As with the activity seen in User Basics Part 1, anytime we see a red text field, this means required data. And at a minimum, these fields must have information entered on them before we'll be able to save this record. We can see that the reported datetime and occurred from datetime are both populated with the same date. In this case, the reported datetime of the original activity. We can update either one of these accordingly as needed. Also here is an occurred to datetime. If entered, once you save this record, you'll see the system calculates the incident duration for you. The incident number, much like the activity number, is system generated, so we will not see this until we save the record. The file number or name field is typically used for your organization's own internal numbering or naming convention, above and beyond what the system generated incident number is. The e-incident number is another locked field. This is used for reference more than anything. Some incidents may be brought into your system through the web portal or a custom web form. These options allow for someone who is not a user of Perspective to submit incidents into your system. Those incidents will go into the gateway first, and the incidents deemed valid will then be accepted into your system, where they can be added to, escalated, and so on. The original e-incident number would then populate this field of the record which has been brought into these data forms. The class is similar to the activity category we looked at in User Basics Part 1. This is a 4-level roll-up that allows you to classify the incident. There may be some similarities, but the values in this list will be different from the ones in your activity category list. The site roll-up is the same and will display the same values as entered on our activity, where it has been escalated as we've done here. The business unit roll-up is typically used to identify the department or business unit of your organization that was affected by this incident occurring. The summary field is where you can add a brief yet concise summary of the incident. We'll see shortly that there is another place where we can add more detailed information. In the Supplemental Details section, there are a series of checkboxes and data entry fields. Check the boxes that apply and complete the data fields with the information that you have. In the case of the follow-up required and follow-up date field, please note that checking the box and/or adding a date will not create a reminder for you. You will need to create your own reminder, such as a view of incidents that would require follow-up, something that we'll look at a little bit later on in this session. Below the supplemental details is a flag section. In User Basics Part 1, we saw that flags may be selected for people. In a similar manner, flags can be used on incidents as well, as a way to further categorize the incident or produce additional metrics and trackable statistics. As with a person flag, change the status to yes when a flag applies. Below the flag section, you may see a user-defined field section. User-defined fields are data entry fields that have been added to your Perspective system that do not exist in the base out-of-the-box version of Perspective. These have been added to meet your organization's needs for data capture. So any questions that you may have on these fields should be directed to your Perspective administrator. UDFs may appear on other forms as well, but will always appear at the very bottom of the page, similar to this. So make sure you scroll all the way down to ensure you've completed all of the data entry. The next form on the incident is the involvements form. This is the same as was discussed in User Basics Part 1. For the interest of saving time, we won't go over the data entry again. But we will mention that when escalated from an activity, as we have done in this example, the involvements already entered on the original activity record will carry over to this new incident. These could be edited if need be, and new involvements can be added in the same fashion as we saw previously as well. The narratives form is where you can add more detailed information that is specific to the incident, above and beyond what you may have already entered into the summary field back on the general form. Narratives could be your own notes, statements, or more detailed summaries. Clicking the Add New link will open up a word processor within Perspective. In the top right corner of the window is the Author field. This will default to your name or the name of the logged in user and is something that you cannot change. Below that is the narrative type lookup. From the list, select the most appropriate value for the narrative that you're adding. Data entry here can be done by typing in the narrative, cut or copy and paste, as well as import and export tab, where you can import the narrative if it exists in another format. The Tools tab allows you to insert tables, images, or links, and the Spelling tab can be used to run a spell check once your narrative has been added. Once the narrative has been accepted, you may see a few other options as well. Edit will allow you to edit the narrative that you just added. You will always be able to edit the narratives where you are the author, but you will need a write enabled that would allow you to edit somebody else's narratives. Also, another write that must be enabled in order for you to see is the seal link. Seal allows you to lock the narrative into a read-only state. Please note that this process is permanent. Once sealed, no user, no matter their access to the system, will be able to edit or delete the narrative, not even yourself. Typically, this write won't be enabled for everyone. Just note that if you do have access to this, once again, sealing the narrative will be permanent. The Attachments tab, like the Involvements again, is the same as what we saw in User Basics Part 1. Here you can add any supporting files in the form of pictures, video, audio, or other documents by either browsing to the file location and selecting it, or dragging and dropping it into the Attachment Manager window. Also, before attaching any files, if not done so already, you will need to save the record before you can actually add anything. The Links tab is also the same as what we saw back in User Basics Part 1. The difference here, though, is that we have a link already created on the Activity Links tab. When we create an incident from an activity, the system will automatically link the original activity to this new incident, indicating that the activity was the source of this incident. Another difference is that we may now see the case links as well. The process for adding a link is the same as what we saw in User Basics Part 1. When a relationship is discovered, you can indicate the link type, the record you're linking to, the date the relationship was effective from, and so on. The Losses tab is a place where we can track the financial impact of the incident's occurrence. There are 3 loss types that can be added here: losses, recoveries, or no impact losses. The data entry for the 3 is similar across the board with some subtle differences. Losses are used to capture the details of both direct and indirect losses that may have occurred by first identifying the associated type. This drop-down list will display the values of incident or any involvement type that you may have added back on the Involvements tab. Selecting one of the possible involvement types as the associated type will unlock the Associated To field. Here, you can specifically identify which involvement you want to associate the loss to. Next, you can indicate the date of the loss, the number of units that were lost, and the value per unit. Then, the appropriate loss type, cause, current loss status, and method in which the loss occurred. The Determined By person will default to yourself, the logged in user, but this can be changed if someone else determined the loss. Finally, in the Notes field, add any additional notes about the loss that may apply. This could be more detailed information in what was lost, or how it was lost, and so on. Recoveries are the gain back to the organization, and the data entry here can be very similar. Again, select the appropriate value or values from the associated type and associated to, as well as the recovery date, the units that were recovered, and the value per unit. Next, identify the recovery type, the recovered by person, and the recovered from, whether this is an organization or a person. The last field is the method, and this can be used to indicate the method in which the recovery occurred. No impact losses are typically used to capture the information that may pertain to potential losses that may take place. Again, complete the data entry as it applies to the loss. Your organization may have a specific process in place when it comes to identifying these losses and recoveries, and any questions on when or how you should be adding this detail should be directed to your manager, supervisor, or prospective administrator. After saving any of these loss details, you will see on the right side of the window a summary of all of the added loss information. The Investigation tab is a place where people with the appropriate rights can go to read, add, or edit the details that may pertain to an incident investigation. The Investigation tab is only available with the ICM and EIM editions of Perspective, and on top of that, only users with the investigator right will be able to see and complete the data entry on this tab. For more information on this tab, as well as the case data forms, please watch the Managing Investigations and Building Cases training session. The Controls tab is again where we can set the security controls for who will be able to access this record, as well as some additional information. As discussed in User Basics Part 1, set the workgroup and access level settings of the record appropriately. An important note here is that the initial security settings of this record do not mirror that of my user, which, as we discussed in User Basics Part 1, is the case for all records we create. The reason for the difference here is because we created this incident from an activity. In this process, the incident will assume the same security settings of the original activity record. Had we created this from scratch, then these settings would have mirrored my user's security settings. Also here, you can identify the current status of the incident, its disposition, and once it's closed, the date it was closed. Again, the record owner field will typically display the logged in user who created the incident. But when created from an activity, this will default to the record owner of that original activity record. The Outcome tab may be used to indicate the cause and impact of the incident's occurrence, as well as if any policies had been affected. The data entry on this tab can only be done by users that have the supervisor right enabled as a part of their user rights. Similarly, the Reviews tab can only be completed by those with the supervisor right, as this is a place where someone can indicate the type of review that they are doing, the date of the review, and add their comments as needed. Finally, the Assignment tab is the same as what we've seen before. Here you can create the record-related tasks for other users, and this will appear on both your dashboard as well as that of the other user that you're creating the assignment for. Last but not least is the Audit History tab. This will display any changes that have been made to this record by any user, including the user that made the change, the date and time of the change, and the before and after values of what was changed. Access to this tab is a right that must be enabled by your prospective administrator. In the top right corner of the viewing pane is a blue shield. This icon will be visible for all users and will show very basic audit information. It will display the user who created the record, as well as the date and time it was created, and the user that may have last modified the record, and again, the date and time that it was modified. Now, let's look at a couple of the other viewing pane toolbar icons that we may see when we're in the data forms. As discussed in User Basics Part 1, the Edit, Add, and Delete buttons are all privileges that must be enabled by your prospective administrator, so you may not see all of these options. The visibility and access to the lock icon is a right that must be enabled. This will allow you to lock the entire record into a read-only state. Any user with access to the record will still be able to read the details on the record, but as long as it's locked, no user will be able to edit the record. Once locked, in the listing pane on the left, a gold lock icon will appear beside the record number, indicating that the record is locked. An unlock icon may also appear in the viewing pane toolbar, and again, a separate right must be enabled in order for you to have access to this. The unlock right will allow you to unlock any locked record that you have access to. This puts it back into a state where you or other users with access to the record would then be able to edit it. The Print button will allow you to print a detail report on this record. These are not the only reports that are available, but these are the only ones that can be accessed from the data forms. Within Analyze and Report, there is also a report section that has a larger list of reports that are available. The Send button allows you to send very basic record information in an email. You may modify this information as well as add to the body of the email and either manually type the email addresses in the To and the CC fields, or click on the green plus sign to search the users in your prospective system with a primary email address. Finally, the Cancel button allows you to cancel any changes that you may have made to the record that you're currently working on. Now, we're going to take a very quick look at the 4 general record data forms that you may have access to: the items, persons, organizations, and vehicles. Items, as we discussed in User Basics Part 1, may be used in different manners by various organizations. The typical data capture on an item data form is a picture of the item name, and possibly a serial number. As a side note, this value will appear in the listing pane in brackets beside the name of the item. This could be used as an alternate method to filter the values within the listing pane. an approximate value, and possibly the item category, which is a 2-level roll-up, usually used to indicate whether this is company property versus personal property, as well as what it is, and a make-model roll-up. In both cases, these have been hidden in this sample database. If the owner of this item is known, the box can be checked to unlock the fields below in order to enter the name of the owner, whether this be a person or an organization. We'll come back to the History tab when we look at the person's data form. The Attachments tab can be used to attach any additional relevant files that might pertain to this record, again in the same manner as discussed earlier in User Basics Part 1. Controls tab will also be the same as we've seen previously, and will display the current security settings of this record. As well, you may also see the Audit History tab if your user has access to it. The person's data form will contain all of the persons that have been involved in past incidents and activities, as well as any person that is a user of Perspective or an officer within the system. On top of the basic person details, additional information that may exist here can include unique features, such as scars, tattoos, and so on, including a description of that feature and location of it, identification information, such as driver's license or employee ID, or other ID information that you can capture, trespass details. If this person has been banned from a particular site, you can indicate where they have been banned from and the expiration date of the notice. Contact details, including phone numbers, addresses, and email addresses. Because you can add multiple values to all 3 of these contact details, there is also a primary checkbox to indicate which is the primary value. This is very important when it comes to the email address of any prospective users. If a primary email address is not identified, the system will not be able to send this individual any notifications should the need arise. A Links tab will appear on the persons, organizations, and vehicle data forms, as we can see here. On this tab, you can link persons to other persons, to organizations, and to vehicles when relationships are discovered. The process for linking these general records is essentially the same as what we've already seen for linking incidents and activities. Again, we need to identify how the 2 records are linked, the other record that we're linking to, and possibly the effective dates for the relationship, and so on. Linking is key for the effective use of visual analysis and for the full potential of your Perspective system, by ensuring that this type of detail is available to help present a clear picture of who, what, and how your organization is being affected by the occurrence of these various activities, incidents, and all of the people, organizations, and vehicles that are involved. The History tab will display the selected entity's history with your various activities and incidents. Under these 2 tabs, you'll see the record numbers where the entity had been involved in the past, when that activity or incident occurred, the class or category of the event, where it occurred, and how they were involved. There is a right that is associated with this tab called the Full History Access. If enabled, you may see some records listed in this grid that exist outside of your security access. In these cases, you may see a record listed here with much of this data showing as restricted. You will not have access to these records, just the knowledge that they may exist, and that the entity was involved in other records that you just don't have access to. The organization data form can be used to capture details of the organization's name, possibly a company logo, the type of organization, as well as a web page URL. Like the person's data form, the organization record also has a Contacts tab to capture all of the phone numbers, addresses, and email addresses of the organization as needed, as well again the Links and History tabs as we just saw a moment ago. Finally, the Vehicles data form allows for the license plate of the vehicle, possibly a VIN number. This is an alternate field that will appear in brackets beside the license plate within the listing pane, and again can be used to filter the list of vehicles. The country the license plate was registered in, as well as the state or province, model year of the vehicle, make and model of the vehicle, style, and color. The other thing you may notice with all of these general record data forms is a Merge button in the Viewing pane toolbar. Access to this button is another right that must be enabled by your Perspective administrator. This button will allow you to merge any possible duplicate records together. Duplication can occur for different reasons, such as not doing proper searches for existing records prior to quick adding, or if security settings of a record is too high for users to see. They might then create a record because they don't have access to it. The key to merging is that you must be 100% positive that the records you are wishing to merge are indeed duplicates, because once merged, the secondary record will be purged from your system and there is no way to recover it. To wrap up this session, we're going to talk about the different views in the top corner of the navigation pane. Views will be used to populate the listing pane with a list of records that you may wish to see. You may have seen back in User Basics Part 1 that clicking the All Records link will display a large list of records in the listing pane. This is not all records within the system, but instead all records that your user has access to. In the listing pane, as we've also already briefly discussed, you're going to see the record number in bold. In some cases, alternate values between brackets beside that number or record name. A lock icon to the left of that record. The outline of the lock just means that the record has never been locked. The gold lock, as discussed a few moments ago, indicates that the record is currently locked into a read-only state, or possibly a silver unlock icon, which will indicate that the record has been locked at least once in the past, but has since been unlocked and is now back in a state where it could be edited, if needed, by the users that have access to it. Other information that may be seen here will be how many attachments that have been saved on the record already, the activity category or incident class, and whether the record is currently open or closed. The listing pane itself will display up to 100 records per page. A counter will be displayed at the bottom of the window with how many pages of records you have access to. You can use the arrows to navigate back and forth between these pages. Alternately, you can filter larger lists by typing a full or partial record number or name into the search box at the top of the window. You may also filter this list by the values that appear in the brackets beside that primary record identifier, as we discussed a few moments ago. You can also sort this list in ascending or descending order, as well as print this list should you need to. To free up more screen space within your data forms, you can also collapse this listing pane by clicking the pin icon. This will collapse it down so you can see more of your data entry fields. Hovering your mouse over top of the tab will temporarily bring the listing pane back, and re-clicking that pin icon will repin it back to the window. Getting back to some of the other views, the Quick View link will allow you to build a specific list of records based off of criteria which you set. Clicking the link will open up a window where you can build the view. One of the advantages of this process is that you can create multiple views and save them to be recalled at any time. Click the Add button to unlock the name field, and then add a name for the view that you're creating. By default, the All Workgroups box will be checked. This view will then list all records from the different workgroups that you have access to. If there is a need to limit the workgroup records, uncheck the All Workgroups box and then check the box beside the specific workgroup records that you wish to see. In the Criteria field below, from the drop-down list, select the field that you wish to use as a filter. From our discussion earlier, let's say we want this view to list the records that require follow-up. I would then select the Follow-up Required field. In this case, the only operator that we have to choose from is the equals. But in some cases, you will have access to others, such as with dates, where you could choose less than, greater than, equals, and more. Next, we need to specify the value to filter by. In this case, this field is a checkbox, so we must choose from yes, checked, or no, not checked. This value field option will also vary depending on the field selection, and this could include the ability to select a value from your database via drop-down list, or by clicking on another button beside the value field, and it could also include manual data entry of the value. Next, if you wish to add additional criteria, you'll need to click the appropriate and/or radio button to unlock the next field criteria line. Understanding the difference between and or and its relationship with your data is key to ensure that you get the proper list of records returned as expected. For example, if a view was being built around two different classes, you must choose or between the two class field lines, because from a data entry point of view, the class is either security or emergency. You can never select security and emergency on the same record. Therefore, an and would return 0 records. In this case, I will select and then I'm going to choose the record owner field as the next line of criteria. Then for the value, I'm going to select my user. In this case, the criteria will filter the records to only the incidents where follow-up was required and where I am the record owner. Had I selected or, this list would have shown all incidents that require follow-up or any incident where I am the record owner, which is more than I would want. Next, I can choose how to order this list, whether it should appear in ascending or descending value, and whether I should include archived records. Archived records are invisible in the listing pane for all users. Building a view such as we are right now and checking this box or using other criteria is one way of at least temporarily displaying any of these archived records. Once it is then shown back in the list, you could edit the record and uncheck that archive box to make sure that it is visible again for all of those people that would need access to it. The Preview button will display a preview of the records that match your criteria in the window below. This is a great way to verify that your criteria was set up properly by seeing the list of records that would be returned. If too many records are listed, maybe you selected an OR when you should have selected an AND. And if too few records or 0 records are listed, maybe you selected an AND when it should have been an OR. If you wish to make this view your default view, check the box below the name field at the top of the window. And this means that every time you come into this data form, this will be the list of records that is initially displayed. Click the Save button to save this view and populate the listing pane. As mentioned, you can create multiple views by repeating this process and saving those views as needed. Each view will then be saved into a list that can then be accessed by clicking on the Save View links and selecting it. Within this list of saved views, your default view, if you have one selected, will be indicated with default in brackets beside the view name. Also, if you have multiple views, a check mark will appear beside the view that you're currently looking at.